Welcome to the Lair of Secrets podcast, the podcast about gaming and being a geek by two 40-something geek dads. I'm Ken Newquist, and I'm a video game completing machine. I'm also probably staying up too late again.
I am David Moore, and we're going to have to change our intro because I am no longer a 40-something geek dad.
Impressive. Congratulations.
Thanks. So, Ken, what's been going on this last week for you?
Well, so summer is over. The leaves are starting to change here in Pennsylvania, and I was just kind of like looking back on, well, gee, this stuff I accomplished this summer. So obviously the big thing is I went to Philmont, but we did a whole episode about that. You can go back and check out episode 19, I believe it was. So I'm not going to talk about that anymore because you guys have heard me talk enough about Philmont. But my other notable accomplishment, other than like spending 12 days backpacking in New Mexico, was I finished my summer reading list for the first time in years during the summer.
Nice.
My last couple of summer reading lists I completed sometime around February or March of the following year for a variety of reasons. I'm not quite sure what clicked this summer. Like I was just on a good pace. Maybe it was a combination of like the books were just long enough or just short enough. I didn't try and read like one Brandon Sanderson novel for the entirety of the summer, which led me read a couple more audiobooks.
Right.
But overall, I think I read like 14, 15 books.
You also had all that time in Philmont to help you read as well?
I did. So I think a couple of strategically placed vacations help. Going to Philmont, I brought my Kindle. So I think I read 2 or 3 books, basically going to, at, and then returning from Philmont. And then going to Lake Champlain in the summer for our summer vacation. I knocked out like 3 or 4 books there. Because when I go there, really, it's just about me, the hammock, a beer, and books.
That sounds like a really nice vacation.
I occasionally get off of the hammock. It is. It is. It's very nice to be there. And, I'll go swimming and hang out with the family. I don't ignore everybody all the time. But it is, everybody knows, like the first day we're on the island, I'm going to be reading books. So
that's nice.
I actually knocked it out. I also had a good routine at home. So I was getting up in the morning and going for a walk with the dogs as part of my training for Philmont. And so that was at least 45 minutes every day of listening to a book. And then I would come back and I would actually sit down and read a book, like while I was having breakfast or what have you.
Nice.
So I think a little bit of like conscious, reading time plus some strategic vacations, and I actually got through my list. So that was pretty nice. And there'll be a link to it in the show notes. We don't need to go over all the books I read again.
Yeah, I almost finished my reading list. I will say I finished my reading list, but it wasn't the one that I told everybody what the reading list was initially. Like there are a couple of books that fell off, but more than what fell off fell back on, got added on. So I feel very satisfied with the books that I have read. And I'm, it has rekindled I've read more books this year than I have in quite a long time. Maybe this year is also including 2020, but it all blurs together. But yeah, I've really enjoyed my getting back into reading, and I've even noticed that the Kindle app on my phone will tell me, "Hey, you're on a reading streak. You've read this many days and this many books," and like that shouldn't like entice me to read, but it's kind of like, oh, I'm on a streak. I better read a day so I don't miss anything. But I just really enjoy the books. Even without that streak, I really enjoyed the books that I've read through. So yeah, I'll try and list those on the site as well, the ones I've gone through.
I also had a couple of strategic trips to the beach. Early in the summer, my daughter and
Nice.
I drove to the beach because she wanted to drive to the beach, and she wanted me to go with her as the practice run, which I think we talked about in an earlier episode. So that was one full day of reading. And then I went with my son in August. And, that's just great. He's building sandcastles. I occasionally pitch in, but most of the time it was just sitting on the beach, reading a book. So living the dream.
Very nice. Yeah.
So other accomplishments during the summer, I finished Fire Emblem 3 Houses for the Switch, which for fans of Fire Emblem, I mean, this is something of an accomplishment. Like it takes you hours and hours to get through these games. The campaigns are pretty meaty.
I think you didn't think, I didn't think you thought that when we talked about this, and this is the newer one that you that you got?
This is the newest one for the Switch. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure you thought it would take you through the end of the year.
I thought so, but I was closer to the end than I realized. And I also just got on just a streak, just like I got really hooked into it. And the game starts off as very much of like a Harry Potter clone, right? Like you have your different houses and they're competing against each other and there's all this school stuff. But then about like halfway through the game, it just kind of ignites and just goes out into the larger world. And you have this kind of epic storyline where the houses that are on these different continents and control these different countries are now fighting against one another. And it was good. I mean, I really enjoyed it. And so I think that just kind of helped compel me to want to play it more. Cool. And the campaign was shorter than I thought.
Gotcha.
So then I finished that and I'm like, well, gee, I wonder how close I am to the end of Fire Emblem Fates Birthright for 3DS. I'm like, well, I've been grinding on this thing for the last like 2 or 3 years. Let's see if I can finish this one. And so miraculously, I knocked it off. I may have been playing entirely too much Fire Emblem. I think I have now officially scratched this itch.
Gotcha.
I'm like, should I go back and play some of the old ones? Like Before Awakening, which is when I started playing the series. I'm like, yeah, no, I probably need to give it a little bit of a break.
Gotcha. It sounds like you have a good feel for the game, and you're ending right before you get sick of it.
Yes. And it's you can be completionist about these things just like you can on any other video game. So I am tempted, and I actually went back and started a plus game, which I've very rarely done in the past, where you can like basically you're starting over, but you get to retain all of your advancements from before. Actually, you retain points for advancements, and you can spend them to build up your character. So it's not like you're starting from scratch. I've never done that before with Fire Emblem, so I'm kind of tempted. I think if I come back to it, I'll do that and play one of the other houses and just see how the game plays. But yeah, I think I'm not like there's a bunch of stuff I could probably finish out in Birthright if I wanted to. There's a bunch of side quests and what have you, but it's just satisfying to actually complete the main story.
Cool. Very cool.
And then a real life accomplishment, I think we both knocked off this achievement this summer, which is dropped my oldest child off at college.
Yep. I have
wow.
Yeah, I have a similar but slightly different achievement, which is 4 days a week. I dropped my child at college because she's still working on her driver's license and she's living at home, going to university, but we happen to live nearby. So it's cheaper to have her live here than in a dorm. And for a variety of other things of like, this is the first year of college and doing it a little slower rather than jumping full into full residential college. University is, I think that's going to work out better. Yeah. I drop her off every morning, and then my wife picks her up every evening, and we are really looking forward to probably within the next month her getting her actual license.
Yes, that is a significant boon. We went from having a kid with her driver's license who could then transport her younger brother to and from the high school to not having her here, and suddenly we have to get him to and from the high school.
Yes.
So I feel your pain.
Yeah.
Thankfully, he's not in quite as many activities as my daughter was. My daughter was in band, and she was not just in band. Like she did the whole enchilada, like, jazz ensemble and wind ensemble, like all of the ensembles, jazz band, marching band. So we were there just like multiple times a day.
Yeah.
For weeks on end, which it was great at the time. I'm also like glad that it's done.
You're done. Yeah. I mean, it's great at the time, but now you're done. The same with my kids. They were both in choir and color guard, which is color guard is normally during marching band during the summer, but then there's a winter guard season, which is much more dance sort of focused, less flags, definitely not outside. And so that and choir was a lot of back and forth. My youngest is, because of her school schedule, can't do choir, had to drop something. And so she dropped choir. She's still in marching band. And then this Thanksgiving is going to be the big milestone because we're going to be in New York for the Macy's Day Parade. Ooh. And because of COVID, they were supposed to go last year. But because of COVID, they're allowing my oldest, who has graduated, but they're still allowing her to come back and participate in the Macy's Day Parade with her sister.
Wow, that's fantastic.
So that'll be pretty cool. And yeah, we'll see how that things go. But yeah, we've got a lot of practice stuff coming up within the next month. So
I'm sure.
Yeah,
I'm sure. So I do have my daughter is at residential college. She is truly away, several states away, and like 6 hours of drive time, which has been interesting. She's called home more than I was expecting. I'm hoping I'm not embarrassing her too much by talking about it, but like we're talking to her every week. Like we always had a good relationship where we would, talk with her and like, she would stop, and just chat with us for like, 15 minutes before going up to her room. But now we're like, and it's not like it's just like, it's very nice and conversational, and it is more than I expected, because I remember going to college and I think I only spoke to my parents when they called me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? My mom did like this little knit thing to say like, call your mother, she worries. Right. And so I had to like set up a reminder to call my parents like once a month so they knew that I was still alive.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of expecting her to kind of go off the radar until fall break, but yeah, it's a different time, right? Like we were more connected in the first place because we have cell phones and what have you. Like when we were in college, it was like, you can leave me a voicemail, write me a letter, I'll get back to you in 3 days.
Yep. And long distance costs.
Now we already had that connection. Yeah, no, I had a long distance calling card. Right now we're 40 something. We are middle-aged geeks with all of the scars. Like I talked to my daughter about that. She's like, "What's a calling card?" Like,
yeah, what's long
let me
distance?
Explain to you how what's long distance. What are you even talking about? Right? Well,
Yep.
So it's been cool. She's coming home for fall break pretty soon, and it'll be fantastic to have her back again. So that was a fun adventure. And just the ramp up for it, right? Like buying the computer, buying like stuff for school. And she was really excited to be actually being able to go back to school. Like, COVID obviously was a big hit on morale, and just, it was a hard year, I think, for the seniors. And to be able to actually go back to something that's like actual school is pretty cool.
Yeah. They still have to wear masks and stuff in class, and I believe vaccines are required, and there's been so much in the news back and forth with stuff and lawsuits and things like that in our area for that stuff. I can never be sure what the final ending up was, but I believe it was vaccines are mandated, and which is good, especially considering Indiana and where it is. But I'm really glad I'm going to both enjoy when she gets her driver's license, but also miss it, because that's a half an hour that I get to sit in the car with her and just talk with her as we're going into school, because a lot of times when she gets home, she's busy with homework or friends online or whatever, and so it's kind of dedicated daddy-daughter time. So, and then I know that my wife enjoys the drive home side of that conversation. So
yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it was a great opportunity when we were driving her back and forth to the high school so much. It was the same sort of thing. Like, even though our trip is only like 10 minutes because our high school is pretty close. But still, you had those moments where you could actually catch up on the day, as opposed to like her junior year where, once she could drive, you had to chase those moments, as opposed to you're a captive audience. Talk to me.
Yes. Yes.
So now that summer is over and looking ahead to the fall, I picked up so many role-playing game books over the last year. I would like to figure out some way to play them, many of which we've actually talked about previously. And since we're actually streaming this, I can show Fate of Cthulhu. We talked about before when we were doing our Fate game.
Up there. Monster of the Week is there.
Monster of the Week, probably right there. Yeah. Also for the Fate game. But worth playing in its own right, I think. Scum and Villainy, which is what I'm currently reading right now.
Yeah, that's around there-ish. Yep.
And the one that I'm hoping I can get my gaming group to play, Colonial Marines.
Don't have that,
which is the Colonial Marines expansion for the Alien role-playing game. So I'm on such an Alien kick right now.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking about, like, how can I do this, right? Like, going to a convention, and I'm curious. I know you went to GenCon, and you're going to be talking about that in a bit. So I'm really curious about your thoughts as to how that But going to a real world convention is one way to get these games in. Maybe my lunchtime gaming groups talked about trying out some different stuff, so that might be an opportunity to rotate something in. Wrangling my online gaming group into trying something other than D&D and Savage Worlds. They mentioned interest in Fate of Cthulhu, so that might be an option. And
that's cool.
Who knows, maybe like setting up a new one-off group, but we'll see. Like I want to make an effort to try and find time to actually play these games as opposed to just having them sit on my shelves or just reading them.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. The GenCon stuff was really weird this year in terms of like talking about going to a game convention. Like Gen Con's normally about 70-ish thousand people, and they limited it to 35,000. And normally Gen Con's pretty spread out. Lucas Oil Stadium, they actually put a floor over all the AstroTurf, which is a giant football stadium, and then they put all the board games and some other role-playing games and some other stuff. Like there's some like boffer events and things like that all along that whole field, and they weren't even in there this year.
Wow.
That was mainly the Indianapolis Convention Center, and a couple of the hotels had stuff. But yeah, it was much smaller, and it actually felt more like Origins because of its size and density or lack of density of gamers. Masks were required and everybody adhered to that. I didn't really hear any complaints about that. Vaccinations, unfortunately, were not required, but from what I understand, I think everybody kind of got through that, and especially because the masks were required. There were a couple of times, like at the opening of the Great Hall, where people got kind of close, a little too close together, but it was nice. The walking wasn't as much as it usually was. My oldest had several friends in town that crashed on our couches during that, so we kind of played chauffeur for them a little bit, and most of them, that was their first Gen Con, and they loved it. And so I'm hoping to see them come back at some point, maybe not on our couches, but at Gen Con.
Right.
It felt kind of like again, it felt kind of like Origins, but it also felt kind of like when we were doing the Game Master show, me and the rest of the cast of the Game Master show, where we'd go in as podcasters and have access to some game designers and stuff like that. You can do that at Origins without a press pass. You can sit down or talk with somebody at their booth and not actually be obstructing the booth from people buying stuff. Like, they are perfectly fine to talk with you. And that was the feel at Gen Con this year. The dealer room was much smaller, but still pretty big. What was weird is Games Workshop was actually there this year, and they have not gone to Gen Con in like a decade. They kind of did their own convention set of stuff, and now I guess they've been lured back to do stuff, and that was pretty cool. I met Matt Forbeck. He had a seminar session. I was like, oh, this would be cool. Let me go and sit down with him. And I kind of had partly interacted with him on Twitter. I was actually tweeting it at, I think, Chuck Wendig, and he thought I was tweeting at him. And it was a funny little, accidental thing. And then it turns out I was the only one at his seminar. So I got to basically talk with him for a solid hour, him and his son, for like a solid hour, about gaming and the history of gaming and, how he got into the industry. And it was pretty amazing. So he's now working.
That's very cool.
Yeah. He's now working on, I think he's working on the Marvel role-playing game that's coming out soon.
Ooh.
So that should be pretty cool. So what else in your gaming list do you have?
That's pretty much it, actually. What do you have on yours? I mean, I'm sure there's more, but those are like the concentrated ones that I really would like to try and get to play over the next I don't
Gotcha.
know. Maybe the fall is too optimistic, but like certainly this winter.
Yeah, I like pretty much every one that you have listed there. I want to dig into deeper again. I've read more Fate of Cthulhu than any of the others. I've run a Fate of Cthulhu game. That was a lot of fun. But I'd still like to dig into it a bit more. But there's some other stuff that I have, you know, in that list of particularly colored books here that are 5e. I picked up the Eberron Rising from the Last War and the Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, which is the source book for Exandria, which is the Critical Role. So a lot of stuff on there. I want to dig into those and see how those things are written. I don't know why I did it, but I got back into Kickstarter a little bit again and have backed Extreme Dungeon Mastery by Tracy Hickman. It's actually a second edition that's coming out. Howard Taylor, who does Schlock Mercenary, which is a webcomic, he's illustrating the whole thing. And one of the stretch goals of the Kickstarter was he would live illustrate it on Twitch. So at least a couple of times a week, he'll start illustrating on Twitch, and you can just watch him illustrate and talk. And then there's a Kickstarter that's out right now, which may or may not be out by the time this podcast airs, but it's out right now for all you watching on Twitch, which probably is 0 because we didn't really announce it. But is the Lazy DM's Companion by Sly Flourish. He did the Lazy DM. This is like book 3-ish in there. And it's mostly 5e related, but you can kind of file off the 5e serial numbers for generic GM advice, which I'm always up for. And I kind of want to see if this will be a gateway for me to like remember all the GM stuff that I did before and see if there's anything new that is, I don't know, that like gaming has changed so much since we started gaming. And yet like some of the stuff that is coming out is brand new and is an evolution of everything that we've gone through before. And yet some of it is people now who are just getting into it are rediscovering things we've known for 20 or 30 years, which is also really cool. And so I kind of want to do the Lazy DM's Companion and take a look at what's new and what is rediscovered. And then, some other stuff for, I'm going to go through Bastion, which is part of the Mythic D6 Mythic D6 rules. And I'm going to go through the core rules for that because there's some stuff in Bastion that I want to use or repurpose for Dice and Fall in that game. And then the last thing I think on here that I want to read is I downloaded 5 Room Dungeons by roleplayingtips.com. I've followed roleplayingtips.com for years. Like I was surprised. I followed them, then I stopped, and then I realized, oh wait, they're still around. Let me go ahead and resubscribe to that. And so the 5 Room Dungeons is like a free PDF that you can grab from them that talks about how you can set up effectively a dungeon with only 5 rooms that kind of like sets the stage for the dungeon and gets to a crescendo and then, you know, goes down and there's your denouement and gaining the treasure. And because a lot of times, and it appeals to me because since life has once again killed another game for me, my Friday game is no more.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah. But it happens. But
we shall mourn its passing.
Yeah. One of the guys was just like, my work schedule's not going to work out, and it only leaves 3 of us. And one of those guys routinely has to do something else for his work. So we do computer gaming stuff right now, occasionally on that day instead now. But like, we don't have time. That's the problem. You know, like life gets in the way.
Right.
And so having a 5 room dungeon that you can run as one session or maybe 2 sessions is really useful to me, rather than let's investigate Undermountain for 4 years. You know, that's that that game will
40,000 room dungeon.
Yes, I have the very first Undermountain box set. Never played it. It's really cool. The maps are awesome. They're really cool looking maps and such like that. But I don't have the time. I just don't have the time. And so the idea of having something effectively like a con game with a meta plot, through plot, you know, like the A plot is that meta plot, and then the B plots are the actual individual games that sometimes, you know, have more role playing on the A plot, that's just more interesting to me at this point for my style of gaming at this time.
Yeah, I think I actually got into 5 room dungeons a couple years ago when my gaming group was still having real world, like our homegrown game convention, and it will return after COVID, I'm sure. Might be a little different, but I got into that because we were getting into high level play, and I was using it as a mechanic to be able to set up an interesting dungeon for 15th level characters, right? Where the rooms themselves are becoming challenges, and I think I did with like some elemental theme type thing, but it keyed into the larger plot. It gave them a concrete thing they can do. It let me focus my design efforts on 5 rooms for high level adventurers instead of 25 rooms for high level adventurers, because let's face it, high level adventurers can blow through like the first couple levels of a dungeon pretty easily, and it just becomes like a grind. Right. And so it became more a tactical and strategic thing where it's like, okay, let's see how I can use this technique to make for good, and it all in 4 hours. Yeah. and
like, I haven't read deeply into it yet. It's on my list, but I can also see from a GM standpoint, the room part of 5 room dungeons doesn't necessarily need to be a physical room. It can be an area, or like you could theater the mind 15 different rooms of a dungeon, but that's room 1 sort of deal. Right. You know, and have more of a cinematic sort of feel, perhaps. But yeah, it's an interesting way to design some dungeons. So didn't mean to talk quite this much about something that's like in the middle of my list, but in terms of games, that's the games that I want to dig into, perhaps in the rest of the year, basically.
Very cool. So you're prepping your shop for some crafting?
Yes, I've got insulation on the garage door, which has helped, because in the afternoons when the sun is setting, the sun comes and hits the steel garage door, but it's not an insulated door. So basically it was just heating up that steel and then becoming a radiator inside the garage. I put in a thermometer and it would regularly read 104. And that is, wow. Yeah, that is not something that I want to work in the summer. So I got some reflective insulation, not a great R value, but it was inexpensive, and it did cut the temps down to the mid 90s, you know? So it did work.
That's improvement.
Yeah. It cut it, you know, between 8 and 10 degrees, which is a huge improvement. You know, if I had infinite money, I would just replace the garage doors with full on insulated garage doors, but I don't have infinite money. And so, yeah, I'm hoping that it will keep the heat in the winter. And I do have a radiant or an infrared heater that I can point at me and it will warm me up, but doesn't necessarily need to warm the entire garage, so that perhaps I can finish the pen that I've been having trouble with. I'm on iteration like 5 of it. I'll get it. Like the first couple, the drill holes didn't go well, and so they were the tube that went in didn't fit quite right, so I redid it. And then the next few, I had problems with taking it down. I'd get it really close to finishing, and then my tool would catch, and the resin blank that was now a very, very thin tube around the brass tube just exploded into multiple pieces.
Oh my gosh.
And it's like, oh, crud.
Not something you look for in a pen.
No.
I mean, maybe if you're blonde.
Yeah, and it's not, wouldn't even be useful for Bond, really. It was an explosion like that. Not enough to kill anybody, enough to annoy people. Yeah, so I switched the type of turning tool that I'm using, and I think I'm there. I'm close, but some of it's like I have to wait for the right weather, and then a little bit because it does get hot, but it's also been really rainy, and I want to turn with the garage door open anyway. At least at this time of year. So if it's shut, it's too hot. But then if I open it, it might rain. It's like a catch-22. But there's also the frustration factor of if I go out there, is another pen going to explode on me? But I'm making it for a friend, so I have to finish this particular pen. Hopefully, I can finish it this week. So, but yeah, I'm hoping to do more in the garage, in the shop this winter, which is why, over the course of this podcast, I've insulated the garage. I put up drywall. I have that space heater stuff. And now I've partially insulated the doors of the garage. And so hopefully that's enough. We'll find out. You had one, shall we say, out of this world or nearly out of this world thing coming up. I see
what you did there.
Yeah. It's an awesome segue, right?
Yeah, that is well done, and I don't need that much insulation for it because I can do it all inside. So I am also being crafty, and since we're streaming, I can actually do this. Yeah, seeing the benefits of streaming. So I am building model rockets. That
looks amazing.
This is the Skyliner. Yeah, it's pretty nifty. So I have my dad and I used to build a ton of model rockets when I was a kid, and he still had a whole bunch of these rockets, which I now have. And so I have been working my way through them. As we've talked about before, my son is part of a scout troop. And so I'm going to be teaching the Space Exploration Merit Badge this spring. And that gave me an excuse to build lots of rockets. So I have lots of rockets. I would like to build them. And then I would ultimately like to launch them. And it's interesting, right? Like there's a lot of this that's actually muscle memory. But to your point, like we were just talking with D&D, there's a lot of things have changed in the last 30 years, right? And so we've had you and I have had a conversation, I guess in Slack, talking about, well, Ken, there is some new kinds of glue that you could conceivably use to put the fins on, because as I hold up this one particular rocket, I don't remember exactly which fin it was, but one of them just refused to stay on. Because if you're not familiar with model rockets, you basically got like a cardboard tube, and you have balsa wood wings, and you glue the balsa wood wings onto the cardboard tube. And the time-tested strategy for doing this is using Elmer's glue. You put it on the fin, you let it get really tacky, which means it's kind of sticky, and then you put it on the body, and then hopefully it stays there. Except for when it doesn't, and it falls off like 5 or 6 times in a row, and you start wondering, why the hell am I doing this on my Friday night?
Yep.
But then you get to the end, and it looks very pretty. I haven't actually put the decals on yet. I'm just about at the point where we're going to put the decals on. Yeah,
but, it looks very pretty, very awesome already. And like there's a super glue plus Elmer's glue trick where you put some dots of super glue, and then the rest of the fin you would put and this is more of a woodworker thing, but I think it would work for model rocketry. Right. And then especially if you have accelerator spray, you can attach the fin, and the super glue kicks and holds, and it holds it. It's not a great hold, but then the Elmer's glue can finally solidify, and you're good.
Right.
And then there's the Eileen's tacky glue, I think is the one that I've used before on other craft projects, which is basically a really thick Elmer's glue that sets up really quickly.
I think I might have to try that one too. I think I have crazy glued my fingers together on other projects like painting miniatures. Yep. I'm not eager to recreate that, but my ultimate goal for this winter is I have a nice collection of really cool rockets. Rockets go in levels of difficulty from level 1, which is very easy, to level 5, which is hella complex, and you may be terrified to build that rocket for most of your life, which is how I would define the Mars lander
Yep.
which is a very advanced rocket that I've had since I think I was 17 and I've never built. But my ultimate goal is to get confident enough in my skills to actually build that and other rockets. So
very cool.
I'm sure we'll be revisiting this throughout the winter as we work on our respective projects. And then hopefully I can find a place to launch. That's the key thing. Find a place to launch.
Yep. So we that's kind of like the things. This is kind of how we've been doing things this season, but we've decided that episode 21 here is the last episode of this particular season, and we kind of wanted to go through walk through the lair again, and revisit some of the rooms that we enjoyed, and talk about those a little bit. And then when you guys hear or see us next, we're going to start our season 2, and we're going to probably, we've always talked about gaming, but it's going to be a bit more of a focus in the next one. Less us talking about our weekly stuff, but more about I don't know, like creating, building your own role-playing game and publishing it, or getting how to run a game when life keeps killing them, or how to run a game with limited time to prep, things like that. And we might even run a game as part of our show here. But Ken, why don't we start our tour of the lair, and our history in the lair for season 1.
I think one of the things that I've enjoyed most about the lair is kind of going back in all the games that we played. We actually played a fair number of games, including some games that I've wanted to play for quite some time. So first, when we started, and I had actually forgotten about this, I think in the back of my mind, I thought we had done Tales of the Loop before we had started Lair of Secrets, but it's a year ago. Yeah. So it was playing Tales of the Loop, Tales from the Loop, which we did in episode 2. And that was a fun game. I really enjoyed the dice mechanic. It was a dice pool mechanic. And so just as a brief recap, Tales from the Loop, it's kids on bikes, right? So you have half of the game is your social life as a kid, interacting with your family, interacting with school, those kinds of things. And then there's the mystery, right? You're going out and solving the weirdness, which in our case was birds.
Yes.
That had fallen under the sway of
intelligent birds.
And we had to figure out what was going on. Intelligent birds. And so it was fun to play. I think it's, looking back on it, I think, we had a good group of people to play it with. I thought this when I read it in the first place, so the first time, and I still think it now. It is a role-playing game that sets you up to be vulnerable, and you have to be okay with that. Right. Yes. Because some of what you're talking about is like, it's not just 12-year-olds on bikes. It's 12-year-olds on bikes. But, maybe your home life isn't quite so great. Right. Yeah. And that could be one of the scenes that you're going to do. And so as players, you need to be comfortable with that. Or you just need to talk about it up front. Like, what is the downtime going to look like and how intense do you guys want it to be? Because it hits close to home. Yeah. It can hit close to home.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that, like, the safety tools that have come out since we first started, that have come out within the last 10 years or so in gaming. That's something that would be really useful in this game. Things like the X card, where it's like, hey, we're getting into a topic that I don't want to talk about, for whatever reason. Maybe we're talking about parents getting a divorce in the game, and that was a really traumatic experience, in my life or for a friend's life or whatever. Let's move to a different scene or a different topic. And I think that's something that I don't remember. I think Tales from the Loop talks about that, but I don't know that we talked about it a little bit, but the group we were playing with, I think, was comfortable enough with each other that if we got into a situation like that, we'd be okay with bringing it up without a particular set of tools. But those tools are good. We had what you did mention something. It's like basically it's kids on bikes. Yes, there is a role-playing game called Kids on Bikes.
I have that.
Yeah. So, but yeah, Tales from the Loop. It's also it's based on the artwork by I don't remember his name, but it's based on a. He also, I think, wrote part of the RPG as well, but it's based on his art, and that art was iconic and strange enough that Netflix made the Tales from the Loop TV series as well.
Yes.
And it's a pretty neat game. I think just like the two other games that we played suffered a little bit from life and drastically different time zones. So
yes, both of those things can mess with your game.
yeah. So go ahead with the other games that we've gone through over this season.
So Brundlewood Bay.
Yeah.
Yes. Brundlewood Bay was you're playing
Murder Mavens.
Murder Mavens.
Yep.
Who are like women in the mold of
like Jessica Fletcher or Phryne Fisher.
Jessica Fletcher, thank you.
But yeah, like 70, 80-year-old women who are part of a book club and yet also seem to get caught up in crimes, specifically murders that are happening in the town around them.
Yeah, so this was a challenging game. Like, so talking about new games that like just force you to think in different directions. This is a game that does not actually have an end until you decide what it is. Right.
Yes.
So that's the mechanic behind it. I don't think that's a state secret, right? Like, you are the murder mavens and you are investigating one or more murders in your town. And as you're gathering the clues, those clues are leading you towards a conclusion. But that conclusion is not predetermined. Like, the scenario isn't going to tell you who it is. The murder mavens, as part of the investigation and the role playing, are going to tell you who it is. And I think that's hard.
It is hard.
It hurts your brain a little bit.
Yeah. When we talked about it before, like, I was going to run this because I was like, wow, this is like entirely play driven. I don't need to do like almost any prep. And I was really wrong because in order to run this game, you have to know the NPCs. You know, you have to play those NPCs. It's a very role play driven thing. And then for the players, like for us, like for anyone who's like done D&D, this would be a big leap because as players, you call for rolls. You know, in D&D, it's either obvious, hey, I want to make an insight check, or like, you have to roll it to hit. But in this, it's much more along the, like, I want to make an insight check all the time. You're like, you don't say, hey, GM, can I make an insight check? You're going, hey, I want to search for clues. I'm going to use this, this, and this and roll this many dice. And here is my result. You know, like, the GM isn't really calling for it. The players have a lot of agency in that game, which is also very different from some of the games that we've played as well. You know, and so that was that, and me needing to prep for all the NPCs so that I could kind of make them interesting and you guys could call for those things was made that game kind of hard to it's a small, tiny little game. You know, it's like maybe 40 pages or something, but it was hard to run. It was fun, but it was one of those things where you had to kind of be in a different mindset from your traditional role-playing game.
Yes. And I think it also, its mechanic, and also like the mechanic of Fate, and actually Scum and Villainy for that matter, or Blades in the Dark, like, there's this built into the mechanic is this indeterminate state, or there's some good, but there's also some bad in your roll. And so I think as game masters and as players, you got to think out what those complications look like. It's like, you succeeded, but this thing happened, right? And so you got the safe open, but, oh, hey, the butler just walked in on you, right? Which is a classic example in many of these different kinds of games. And so that also makes your brain work.
Yeah.
Which I am not complaining about anyway, but it forces you, like D&D and other games that you're very familiar with, or like Savage Worlds, you fall into kind of a predictable way of doing things. And so you can it's very comfortable and you can just do it. These games make you think. And D&D can make you think too, but it's different.
Like D&D, there are parts of D&D that haven't changed since its inception. Right. Like picking a lock takes time, but the consequences of failure are like, oh, the lock's broken, you can't pick it again, or you have to take more time. Well, you know, you could pick the lock for days if you wanted to, unless the GM stops you. Whereas like in Brindlewood Bay, you know, if you're, and in several of the others, like any of the Blades in the Dark, Forged in the Dark sort of settings, you know, it's like you're going to roll and it's like, oh, you didn't succeed in picking the lock and something happens because of it. You know, like if you're trying to go in quiet, you've left evidence that the lock has been picked, or you've been there for so long that the guard shift is now changing and now you're in danger of being discovered by the guards. Like that's built into the roles and the rules, whereas it's not as built in to D&D, you know, because of its upbringing through the last 40, 50 years.
And so this brings us to our next game that fits in this mold, which is the Army Corps of Engineers Special Ops game that you ran. Well, actually, we both ended up running sessions for it using Fate Condensed. Again, I think it was a very challenging game. I think I really enjoy Fate, and I hadn't played it for many years. The last time I had played it previously might have been your Spirit of the Century game at Origins,
which was about a decade ago.
Yeah, about a decade ago, right? And so it was cool. I really. So there's two things I enjoyed about that. First of all, I enjoyed playing Fate and Fate Condensed. I think it's a really cool system, and I like mental and physical and social challenges are all modeled in similar ways, and so all of them can hurt you in some way. All of them can advantage you in some way, and so you can take down the Bat Squatch by giving him marijuana laced brownies. I think they were marijuana. They were special brownies.
Yeah, they were special brownies. Sure. They were special brownies, and we basically socially engineered him to kind of become our friend rather than beat the crap out of him. Right. Yeah, and
which I did not see coming and was totally cool.
Yeah, and I liked it. I think that game again, that was the. You know, we had a 3-hour time zone difference, and Fate also requires people to be very proactive, you know, and to for the GM to like call for to complicate things, but also for the players to be very more awake than I was at 9 o'clock when we started. That's a good way to put it. You know,
it was a very good way to put it.
You know, I'm not 20 anymore, unfortunately. You know, the all night gaming sessions, you know, I start shutting down. Well, you know, for anybody who might be watching, you know, it's 20 till 11 here. And that's really late for me. You know, like we're probably going to wrap up here and I'm just going to go straight to bed. I might read a little bit, but yeah, I don't stay up much past that anymore. I get up earlier. It's a weird thing. I don't know. Getting old is weird.
Yeah, and the challenge, of course, too, is as I think I've mentioned before, like you stay up until 2 a.m. or 3 a.m, and that's guaranteeing that one of your kids is going to be sick at 5 a.m,
right? And then
or the dog is going to be sick, or some emergency is going to come up that you have to deal with, right? Like it's easier when you're 20 because you can bounce back from it, but you also didn't have those emergencies.
Yeah, and you know. Like if you stay up that late, you know you're going to feel it the next day. But then having that emergency on top of it is just extra. Ugh. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Middle-aged gamers, everybody.
Yep. So we try to figure out better ways to do this.
Yeah. So we talked about Brindlewood Bay on episode 6, and the show notes will be linking out to individual episodes. We talked about Army Corps of Engineers and Fate on episode 11. And one of the things I really enjoyed about episode 11 was we also then brainstormed the campaign itself. Like, what was it we were trying to accomplish? Like factions that might appear in it, things we might want to incorporate into the game. We had a conversation about like, is there magic or isn't there magic? Well, we don't know quite yet. So maybe there is.
Yep.
I really enjoyed that conversation. I thought it was going back and editing it again and listening to it. I really enjoyed it too.
I think that's one of the things that I'd like to pull into season 2 for some stuff. like brainstorming some stuff for Dyson Fall, or brainstorming stuff for whatever game that we want to run / play, that sort of thing. I think that would be, I mean, that interests me. I don't know if it interests any of our listeners, but that certainly interests me. And well, half the reason I make this podcast is to talk to you and what interests both of us. So,
Right. So, kind of moving on to a different part of gaming. And clearly we spent a lot of time. Some of my favorite parts were really talking about gaming. Like, I've enjoyed talking about the intersections of geekdom and gaming and family life and what have you. And I think that's been interesting too. And I think people can relate to that. But the stuff that stood out to me as I was editing episodes, oh, wow, I really enjoyed that conversation. The RPG Vault episode, which I think we could do another one of at some point, maybe with a different service that we have a bunch of PDFs on. But when we went through in episode 13 and looked at our drive-through RPG archives and just for the treasures that were hidden in the archive,
yep,
that was pretty cool.
Yep. There's another thing that we could add on to that, that we might do is I have a pretty big collection of old Dragon magazines, and going through those and looking at how things have aged, for good or ill, but also hey, this is the same advice that you'd hear right now on Twitter that is in this, letters to the editor column sort of thing. I went through a couple of those with Jerry Grayson on our Cowboy Dracula YouTube channel. But we just we haven't been able to do any more of those. So maybe we can pull those in here. So
I have the Dragon Magazine PDF archive.
Cool.
That was released many years ago.
Yeah, I didn't have the money to pick that up, but I think that would be pretty cool to have.
So I also like the Game Master Hacks show, talking about Game Master toolboxes and other in-game hacks that we could do. I think that was just fun. That was episode 12. I'd love to come back to that, especially also talking about some techniques that we'd like to pull into our more regular games, right? So I think my Dungeons and Dragons games and Savage Worlds games have benefited from playing other games.
Yeah.
So, talking about, hey, the clock from Blades in the Dark. Oh man, I could see how that would really enhance other games, right? And just kind of get people's heads around the mechanic. But yeah,
actually, I used the clocks. I used some clocks in our Army Corps of Engineer games a couple of times, and yeah, that concept is good. There's a small horror game called Dread, and its central mechanic is a Jenga tower, and if you want to do something risky, the GM says you have to pull 1, 2, or 3 pieces sort of thing. And if you fail and the tower falls over, your character will die. And so it really ramps up the tension. But that was one of the things that that I've been thinking of for, if people were playing in in real life again. But if there's instead of using a clock, maybe you use a Jenga tower, and so it's up to the physical dexterity of the actual players to move things, and then maybe use that kind of as a timer of you're being chased, or you have to get to this area, you have to do something in a certain amount of time, and as you do more actions, you have to pull more pieces, and eventually the tower will fall, and that's when this climactic thing happens. It's one of the ideas that I was having about it. So yeah, I'd like to revisit some Game Master hacks as well.
And so the last thing I really enjoyed was our summer reading list. Obviously, we both got really into reading books this summer, and I think it was great to do some cross-pollination between our different lists and talk about different authors and what we liked. And I think we were mostly positive, which I also enjoyed.
Yep.
But that was cool, just kind of running through what we were planning on reading for the summer. I liked that as a focused episode, right? And I think doing, as we get into season 2, I could see here's a topic, and we just want to take the whole episode and we're going to focus on this particular thing as a special thing, summer reading list, winter reading list.
Yep.
Or some other thing that we just want to focus in on. I think that was a good example of a focused episode, and that was back in episode 17.
Yep. I think 2 of our big ones was we want more Murderbot, and
Definitely.
we want book 3 of Patrick Rothfuss's current set of books. But we don't know when that will come out.
I think I spent half the podcast trying to listen to his last book.
Well, that's because that podcast, if you're listening to it on Audible, is like 1,000 hours. You know, it's really big.
Yes,
book.
that book took a very long time to listen to.
Yeah, but it's a good one. So
it is a good one. It is a good one. So that's my thoughts on Retrospective. Our thoughts on Retrospective. Do you have anything else?
I can't think of anything else right now. I think that's a pretty good one. We did talk a lot about books and such in there, and we'll continue to do that in season 2 for sure, because that's just a big part of our lives too, and it informs our gaming too. There's a lot of stuff. Like there's a book I picked up specifically because it's set in a like post-apocalyptic future that's kind of like Dyson Fall, but not. And so I've started reading it to kind of mine it for some ideas for that setting as well. And it doesn't fit Dyson Fall as much as I wanted it to, but that's okay because it's still a good book. So
right.
But yeah, it's been really great doing season 1, and I'm looking forward to season 2.
I am as well. So thanks everybody for listening. If you had feedback, especially on season 1, we would love to hear it. So you can send it to us at podcast@lairofsecrets.com or via Twitter @lairofsecrets. You can also visit lairofsecrets.com and leave us some feedback, topic ideas, or your own thoughts about what we've talked about and what you'd like to see in season 2.
Yep. And we have something more to add that we've never added before, which is we are Lair of Secrets at twitch.com. So we are going to try and stream more often when we record. So if you want to get the raw and uncut, we'll try and do this on a schedule that you guys can show up for and ask us questions live. So hope to see you again soon.